A dedicated police officer's life takes an extraordinary turn when an elderly woman with Alzheimer's begins appearing at his door each night. As he discovers her tragic past, their lives become intertwined in ways neither could have imagined. But as her condition worsens and time grows short, he must make difficult choices that will test the boundaries of family, duty, and what it truly means to care for someone. But before we dive into this story, tell us in the comments from where you're watching from today, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. The night shift had been particularly grueling for Officer Darnell Hayes. 3 domestic disturbances, a fender bender that nearly turned violent, and endless paperwork had left him exhausted. All he wanted now was to sink into his worn leather recliner, catch some mindless television, and let the tension of the day melt away. The digital clock on his microwave blinked 11:42 p.m. as he pulled a TV dinner from the freezer. The quiet of his modest suburban home was a welcome change from the chaos of Portland streets. Through his kitchen window, he could see the autumn wind playing with fallen leaves in his backyard, creating tiny whirlwinds under the security light. The knock came just as he was about to push the start button on his microwave. At first, it was so gentle he thought he might have imagined it. Then it came again, slightly more insistent, but still hesitant, like someone who wasn't quite sure they had the right house. Darnell's hand instinctively moved to his hip, where his service weapon would normally be, before remembering he'd already locked it away in his gun safe. 12 years on the force had taught him to be cautious, especially about late-night visitors. He approached the front door, flicking on the porch light. Through the peephole, he saw an elderly white woman, probably in her mid-70s, standing on his welcome mat. She wore a pale blue cardigan despite the chilly night air, and her silver hair was perfectly set in neat curls. In her arms, she clutched a worn brown leather handbag, as if it contained all her worldly possessions. "Hello," Darnell called through the door. "Can I help you?" "Mark?" The woman's voice wavered. "Mark, honey, are you home?" Darnell opened the door, keeping the security chain in place. "Ma'am, I think you might have the wrong house. I'm Officer Hayes." The woman's face crumpled in confusion. Her pale blue eyes, magnified behind thick glasses, darted around uncertainly. But this is where Mark lives. Number 42 Maple Street. He always comes home at this time." Darnell glanced at his house number. 242 Maple Street. "Ma'am, this is 242, not 42. Are you looking for someone?" "My son," she said, her voice suddenly clear and certain. "Mark Carter. He's supposed to be home by now. He always comes home for dinner." She clutched her handbag tighter. "I made his favorite tonight. Meatloaf with sweet potato casserole." Something in her confused expression and the way she kept glancing around reminded Darnell of his grandmother in her final years. The same lost look, the same certainty about things that couldn't possibly be true. He unlatched the chain and stepped onto the porch. "I'm Darnell Hayes." "What's your name, ma'am?" "Evelyn," she said, smoothing her cardigan. "Evelyn Carter. Mark's mother." She peered past him into the house. "Is he inside? He must be tired from his training." "Training?" "At the base." Evelyn nodded. "He's shipping out soon, you know. Such a brave boy, my Mark." Pride filled her voice, but there was something else there too, a tremor of fear or worry that made Darnell's heart ache. "Mrs. Carter, why don't we sit down for a moment?" He gestured to the porch swing. "It's a bit chilly out here." She allowed him to guide her to the swing, her movements precise and ladylike despite her confusion. As they sat, Darnell noticed she wasn't wearing a coat, just the thin cardigan. Her hands, spotted with age, still gripped the handbag tightly. "May I?" He gestured to the bag. "Perhaps there's something in there that could help us get you home?" After a moment's hesitation, Evelyn nodded. Darnell carefully opened the bag, finding a wallet with an ID card inside. The address listed was just 3 blocks away, 1487 Elmwood Drive. "Mrs. Carter, you live on Elmwood, is that right?" "Oh yes," she smiled. "Such a lovely street. The magnolias bloom every spring. Mark planted one for me when he was just a boy." Her smile faltered. "But he's not there now. He said he'd be here. He promised." Darnell thought of his grandmother in her final years, how she'd sometimes wake up asking for her long-dead husband, convinced he was just in the next room. The memory of her confusion, her fear when reality didn't match what she knew to be true, still haunted him. "Mrs. Carter, let me help you get home. It's not safe to be out alone this late." "But Mark, we can check back tomorrow," he said gently. "Maybe he got delayed at the base." She seemed to consider this, then nodded slowly. Yes, that must be it. Those sergeants work them so hard sometimes." She patted Darnell's hand. "You're very kind, young man. Just like my Mark." The walk to Elmwood Drive was slow but peaceful. Evelyn chatted about her garden, about the neighborhood kids who helped her with her leaves, about Mark's childhood adventures. Her stories jumped through time without warning. One moment Mark was a toddler learning to walk, the next he was graduating high school. The house at 1487 Elmwood was a well-maintained craftsman with carefully tended flower beds, though some weeds had started to creep in around the edges. The porch light was on, and through the window, Darnell could see a table set for two, complete with candles and what looked like a fully prepared meal. Evelyn found her keys in her handbag without trouble, muscle memory apparently intact, even if other memories weren't. As she opened the door, she turned to Darnell. "Would you like to come in? There's plenty of meatloaf, and Mark won't mind. He's always bringing friends home from the base." "Thank you, Mrs. Carter, but I should get back to my rounds." He watched as she stepped inside, making sure she was steady on her feet. "Will you be all right?" "Oh yes," she smiled. "Mark will be home soon. He always comes home to his mother." That night, as Darnell tried to sleep, his mind kept returning to Evelyn Carter. He thought about his grandmother's battle with Alzheimer's, how it had stolen her memories piece by piece, until even familiar faces became strange to her. He remembered the helplessness he'd felt, watching her slip away while he was away at the police academy. The next evening, just as Darnell was returning from his shift, another knock came at his door. This time, Evelyn wore a different cardigan, pink instead of blue, but carried the same worn handbag. "Is Mark home?" she asked, as if their interaction the previous night had never happened. "He promised to help me with the garden today." And so it began. Each night that week, Evelyn appeared at his door, always looking for Mark, always with a different reason. On Tuesday, she said he was supposed to fix her leaking faucet. On Wednesday, she claimed they had tickets to a concert. Thursday, she insisted he was coming home on leave from basic training. Each time, Darnell would patiently walk her home, listening to her stories about Mark, about her life, about the neighborhood as it used to be. Sometimes she'd repeat the same story multiple times in a single walk, but he never corrected her. He'd learned from his grandmother that arguing with someone with Alzheimer's only caused distress. On Friday night, the knock came later than usual. When Darnell opened the door, he found Evelyn in tears, her hands trembling as she held out a photograph. "He hasn't come home," she sobbed. "He always comes home. He promised." The photo showed a young man in dress blues, his smile bright and confident. He stood ramrod straight, pride evident in his bearing. The resemblance to Evelyn was clear in the shape of his eyes and the set of his jaw. "This is Mark?" Darnell asked softly, guiding her to the porch swing once again. "My brave boy," she nodded, touching the photo with gentle fingers. "He just graduated basic training when this was taken. Said he wanted to make a difference in the world." Her voice cracked. "He promised he'd come back. He always kept his promises." Something in her tone made Darnell's chest tighten. He'd heard that tone before, from families of fallen officers, from parents who'd lost children. It was the sound of grief so deep it had become part of who they were. The next morning, instead of going straight home after his shift, Darnell drove through the neighborhood, stopping to talk with some of Evelyn's neighbors. Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived next door, filled in the gaps. "Poor Evelyn," she sighed, watering her petunias. "She's been alone since her Mark passed. Afghanistan, back in '05. IED, they said. She was never the same after that, but the Alzheimer's. It's like she's losing him all over again, every single day." That evening, when Evelyn knocked on his door, Darnell invited her in for the first time. She sat primly on his couch, her handbag in her lap, and looked around with interest. "Mark would like this house," she said, nodding approvingly. "He always wanted a place with a big kitchen. Said he'd learned to cook in the army. Can you imagine? My boy, who once burned water trying to make pasta." She launched into a story about teenage Mark attempting to make dinner for her birthday, setting off all the smoke alarms, and having to order pizza instead. Her eyes lit up as she spoke, her hands gesturing animatedly, and for a moment, The confusion seemed to lift. "He was such a good boy," she said softly. "Always thinking of others. Just like you." She reached out and patted Darnell's hand, then froze, looking at him with sudden intensity. "Mark?" The word hung in the air between them, heavy with hope and confusion. Darnell felt his throat tighten. "No, Mrs. Carter. I'm Darnell. Remember? Officer Hayes." But something had shifted in that moment. A seed planted that would grow into something neither of them could have anticipated. As he walked her home that night, Evelyn chatted happily about his supposed childhood adventures, seamlessly weaving Darnell into her memories of Mark. Standing on her porch, watching her disappear inside to her empty house and her table set for two, Darnell made a decision. He couldn't bring Mark back, couldn't fix her memory or ease her grief. But he could be there, could listen to her stories and walk her home and make sure she wasn't alone in her confusion. Sometimes, he realized, that's all anyone can do. Be present in someone else's story, even if that story exists only in their memory. The early morning sun cast long shadows across Maple Street as Darnell guided his patrol car through the quiet neighborhood. It had become his routine now. A slight detour before heading home after his night shift, just to drive past Evelyn's house. Sometimes he'd see her in her garden, greeting the dawn with her roses. Other times, the house would be still, curtains drawn against the morning light. Today, he noticed her mailbox was overflowing. Without hesitation, he pulled over and gathered the stack of envelopes and magazines, many of them dampened by the previous night's rain. As he approached her front door, he could hear classical music playing softly from within. "Mrs. Carter," he called out, knocking gently. "It's Officer Hayes." The music stopped, and after a moment, Evelyn appeared, wearing a flour-dusted apron over her usual cardigan. "Oh, Officer Hayes, what a lovely surprise. I was just baking cookies, Mark's favorite snickerdoodles." Her face brightened. "Would you like to come in? They're almost done." The house smelled of cinnamon and vanilla, warm and inviting. Darnell followed her into the kitchen, where a timer ticked steadily on the counter. Family photos lined the walls of the hallway, catching his attention. Many featured a young man in various stages of life. A toddler on a tricycle, a teenager in a football uniform, a proud soldier in dress blues. Darnell stopped, pausing by a particularly striking photo of Mark in his combat fatigues, arm thrown around a fellow soldier's shoulders, the Afghan mountains rising behind them. Evelyn beamed, joining him by the photo. "That was just before." Her voice trailed off, confusion clouding her eyes. "He'll be home soon. He promised to help me organize these old newspapers." Darnell noticed a stack of yellowed newspaper clippings on the coffee table. As Evelyn returned to check on her cookies, he gently lifted the top one. The headline made his heart sink. "Local soldier among 5 killed in Afghanistan bombing." Mark's young face smiled up from the page, the same bright smile from the photos on the wall. The timer's sharp ding broke the silence, and Evelyn bustled back with a plate of warm cookies. "Mark always says they're best when they're still warm," she said, offering him one. "Though sometimes he's so busy with his training, he forgets to come home for them." Darnell accepted a cookie, watching as Evelyn settled into her armchair, automatically reaching for the worn brown handbag that sat beside it. She rarely let it out of her sight, he'd noticed. "Mrs. Carter," he said carefully, "would you tell me more about that bag? It seems very special to you." Her hands caressed the leather surface, fingertips tracing well-worn paths along its seams. "Oh, this old thing? Mark gave it to me, for my birthday, right before he left for his last tour." She opened it slowly, reverently. He said, "Mom, keep all our memories in here, so they'll be waiting when I get back." Inside, Darnell could see a jumble of treasures. A pair of dog tags, their metal surface dulled with age, several creased letters and faded envelopes, and what looked like a child's craft project, a braided bracelet made from colored string. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the bracelet. Evelyn nodded, carefully lifting it out. "He made this in 2nd grade. Mrs. Thompson's class. They were learning about friendship bracelets. Mark said the blue was for trust, and the green was for growth." She smiled, lost in the memory. He was always such a thoughtful boy. Over the next few weeks, Darnell found himself spending more and more time with Evelyn. He'd stop by after his shifts to help her with groceries, fix loose hinges, or just sit and listen to her stories. Sometimes she knew him as Officer Hayes, but increasingly, she called him Mark, weaving him into her memories of her son. "Remember when you broke your arm climbing old Mr. Peterson's apple tree?" She'd say, or "You were always so careful helping me in the garden, even as a little boy." At first, these moments unsettled him, but gradually, he learned to navigate them with gentle redirection or simple acknowledgement. He discovered it was kinder sometimes to exist in her reality than to force her into his. Not everyone understood his growing involvement in Evelyn's life. At the precinct, his partner Rodriguez pulled him aside after a shift. "Man, what are you doing?" Rodriguez asked, concern evident in his voice. "You're spending all your free time with this woman, taking on her problems. You've got enough on your plate with the job." "It's not like that," Darnell tried to explain. "She needs someone looking out for her, and that someone has to be you. Come on, Hayes. There are services for this kind of thing. Professional care homes." Later that week, Captain Sullivan called him into her office. "Officer Hayes, your dedication to community service is commendable, but I'm hearing you've been making unauthorized stops during your patrols." "Just quick welfare checks, Captain. 5 minutes, tops. And staying hours after your shift?" She raised an eyebrow. "Look, Darnell, I get it. We all have cases that touch us personally, but you need to maintain professional boundaries." Even his sister Maya, during their weekly phone call, expressed concern. "Darnell, you're not responsible for every lost soul in Portland. What happens when she gets worse? When she needs more than you can give?" But none of them had seen Evelyn on the difficult nights, like the evening she showed up at his door in her nightgown, tears streaming down her face. "Mark," she'd sobbed, clutching his arm. "You forgot me. You promised you'd come home for dinner, but you forgot me." The raw pain in her voice had torn at his heart. He'd wrapped her in his jacket and held her while she cried, understanding suddenly how deeply she was trapped in her fractured memories. In her mind, every missed dinner, every absent moment was happening right now, layers of loss piling up like autumn leaves. Then came the morning she insisted on visiting the cemetery. She'd been agitated since dawn, pacing her front porch when Darnell arrived for his usual check. "We have to go," she said firmly, already dressed in her Sunday best. "Mark's waiting for us. He always visits his father on Sundays." Darnell hesitated. In all their time together, she'd never mentioned wanting to visit the cemetery. "Mrs. Carter, are you sure?" "Please," she interrupted, her voice suddenly clear and urgent. "He needs us there." Something in her tone made him agree. He helped her into his personal car. It wouldn't do to take her in the patrol vehicle, and followed her directions to Riverside Cemetery. The autumn morning was crisp and bright, sunlight filtering through trees just beginning to turn golden. Evelyn moved with surprising purpose through the rows of headstones, her worn handbag clutched tightly, as always. She stopped before a military marker, its surface still relatively new compared to its neighbors. "Mark James Carter, Sergeant, U.S. Army, Afghanistan, 1983 to 2005, beloved son, American hero." Darnell stood back, giving her space as she knelt beside the grave. She reached in her handbag and pulled out a snickerdoodle cookie wrapped in a napkin, placing it carefully at the base of the stone. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there when you needed me. A mother should be there. A mother should know." Her words dissolved into quiet sobs. Darnell knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. She turned to him, her eyes clear and filled with a pain so deep it took his breath away. "He called me that morning," she said softly. "Before the mission. I was busy with the garden club meeting. Told him I'd call him back that evening." Her fingers traced the letters on the headstone. "I never got to say goodbye, Mrs. Carter," Darnell started, but she continued as if she hadn't heard him. "Sometimes I forget he's gone. I wake up and start making his favorite breakfast, or I hear a car door and think it's him coming home." She looked at Darnell, really looked at him, and for a moment he saw complete lucidity in her eyes. "Other times, I see him in kind faces like yours, and it helps. It helps to pretend, just for a moment, that he found his way back to me." The weight of responsibility settled over Darnell like a heavy cloak. He understood now that he wasn't just checking on an elderly neighbor or helping someone in need. He was becoming a guardian of memories, a keeper of stories that might otherwise fade away like morning mist. They sat there together as the sun climbed higher, listening to the rustle of leaves and distant traffic. Evelyn told stories about Mark. Real stories this time, not the confused fragments of her usual tales. She spoke of his childhood dreams of becoming a soldier like his father, of his passion for helping others, of his last leave when he'd painted her kitchen and fixed the loose boards on her porch. "He would have liked you, Officer Hayes," she said finally, her hand finding his. "You have his heart." As they walked back to the car, Evelyn's steps became more uncertain, the clarity of the moment fading like a radio signal growing distant. By the time they reached her house, she was asking if Mark would be home for dinner. Darnell helped her inside, made sure she was comfortable in her favorite chair with her precious handbag beside her. As he turned to leave, she called out, "Mark?" He paused in the doorway, looking back at her gentle, confused smile. "Thank you for coming home," she said softly. Driving away, Darnell thought about all the warnings he'd received about getting too involved, about maintaining professional distance. But sometimes he realized the right thing to do wasn't the professional thing. Sometimes the right thing was simply being there, holding space for someone's grief, their joy, their confusion, holding it all with the same careful tenderness that Evelyn held her handbag of memories. He pulled over to the side of the road and took out his phone, scrolling to Captain Sullivan's number. He had some vacation days saved up. Maybe it was time to use them, to be there for Evelyn properly, not just in the margins of his shifts. Because sometimes, the family you choose is as important as the family you're born into. And sometimes, love means stepping into someone else's story, even when you know how it ends. Winter crept into Portland like a quiet thief, stealing away the last brilliant colors of autumn and replacing them with steely skies and bitter winds. As the seasons changed, so too did Evelyn, her lucid moments becoming as rare as warm days in December. Darnell noticed the decline during his daily visits. She'd forget mid-sentence what she was saying, lose track of time more frequently, and sometimes even forget how to do simple tasks like making her beloved snickerdoodles. But most concerning was how she'd stopped calling him Officer Hayes altogether. Now he was always Mark, her confusion deepening like the lengthening winter shadows. One morning, he arrived to find her trying to make coffee with cold water and no filter, grounds scattered across the counter like black snow. "Mark, honey," she said, frowning at the coffee maker, "I can't seem to remember how this works anymore." Her hands trembled as she tried to scoop up the spilled grounds. "Everything's getting so foggy lately." Darnell gently guided her to a chair and began cleaning up the mess. "Let me help with that, Mrs. Carter. You're such a good boy." She smiled vacantly. "Just like your father. He always knew how to fix things too." She clutched her ever-present handbag closer. "Is he coming home soon? He's been gone so long." These moments of layered confusion, where she mixed up not only Darnell with Mark, but also different times in her life, were becoming more common. Worried, Darnell began searching for any family members who might help support her. He spent his off hours combing through her photo albums, looking for names, making calls, even hiring a private investigator with his own savings. The results were disheartening. Mark had been an only child. Evelyn's husband, James, had died of a heart attack when Mark was just 16. Her own siblings had passed away years ago, and she had no living cousins or close relatives. The few distant relations he managed to track down showed little interest in helping. "Look, officer," one second cousin in Florida had said, "it's sad about Evelyn, but we haven't spoken in 20 years. We've got our own lives here." Darnell knew he needed to consider other options. After consulting with her doctor, he arranged a tour of Sunrise Haven, a well-regarded assisted living facility nearby. The director, Ms. Chun, was warm and understanding as she showed him around. "We specialize in memory care," she explained, gesturing to the bright, homey common areas. "Our staff is trained to handle the unique challenges of Alzheimer's patients. Mrs. Carter would have 24-hour support here." But when Darnell broached the subject with Evelyn, her reaction was immediate and fierce. "Absolutely not," she declared, standing up from her armchair with surprising strength. "This is my home. Mark will need to know where to find me when he comes back. Mrs. Carter, please." "No." Her voice cracked with emotion. "You don't understand. He promised he'd come home. If I leave, if I'm not here, Tears welled in her eyes. How will he find me? The next day, Darnell started asking around the neighborhood about Evelyn's history. Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd lived next door for 30 years, invited him in for coffee and shared her memories. Evelyn was the heart of this neighborhood, she said, showing him old block party photos. Every new family that moved in got one of her welcome baskets. Homemade bread, jam, cookies. She ran the PDA, organized meals when anyone was sick, taught Sunday school for 20 years. Mr. Jenkins, the retired mailman, remembered how she'd send care packages to not just Mark, but all the local kids serving overseas. She'd include extra cookies and supplies for their whole unit. Said no soldier should feel forgotten. The stories painted a picture of a woman whose capacity for love extended far beyond her own family. But they also revealed the depth of her loss when Mark died. She held it together for the memorial service, Mrs. Rodriguez recalled, wiping away tears. Stood there like a statue, accepting the folded flag. But after, it was like a light went out. She stopped teaching Sunday school, dropped out of the garden club, started spending more time alone with her memories. The more Darnell learned about Evelyn, the more he recognized something in her that reminded him of his own mother, who'd passed away when he was in high school. The same gentle strength, the same unlimited capacity for love. He found himself sharing things with Evelyn that he'd never told anyone, about his fears on the job, his dreams of maybe making detective someday, his regret at not being there more for his grandmother in her final years. Sometimes, in her confusion, Evelyn would respond as if he were Mark, offering mother's advice that seemed to bridge both relationships. Other times, she'd simply listen with such profound empathy that it didn't matter who she thought he was. One crisp morning in January, as they sat on her porch watching chickadees at the bird feeder, Evelyn had a moment of startling clarity. "Darnell," she said, using his real name for the first time in weeks, "are you sure you're not my Mark? Sometimes I look at you, and I see him so clearly, not just in how you look, but in your heart." Darnell took her hand, choosing his words carefully. "Maybe I'm here because he couldn't be. Maybe some people come into our lives to help us carry our memories when they get too heavy to hold alone." She squeezed his hand, tears sliding down her cheeks. "You know, he would have been about your age now. He had such plans. Wanted to become a police officer after his service, just like you." The moment passed like a shooting star, brief but brilliant, and by afternoon she was back to calling him Mark. But something had shifted in their relationship, a deeper understanding that transcended names and roles. Realizing that Evelyn needed more support than he could provide alone, Darnell began organizing the neighborhood to help. He created a schedule where different neighbors would check in throughout the day. Mrs. Rodriguez agreed to have morning coffee with her. The teenage Garcia twins from across the street would help with yard work and bring in her mail. Mr. Jenkins offered to drive her to doctor's appointments. "It takes a village," Darnell told his partner Rodriguez, who had finally come around to understanding his dedication. "We're not just helping her. We're preserving a piece of our community's heart." The system worked well until the night of the winter storm. Portland rarely saw serious snow, but this storm brought not only heavy snow, but also fierce winds and freezing rain. Darnell was working a double shift, helping with weather-related emergencies, when his phone rang at 11 p.m. It was Jenny Garcia, her young voice tight with worry. "Officer Hayes? Mrs. Carter just walked past our house. She's in her nightgown, and she keeps calling for Mark. Dad tried to stop her, but she wouldn't listen." Darnell's heart clenched. Which way was she heading? Toward the park. "Officer Hayes." She didn't even have shoes on. Darnell hit the lights on his patrol car and headed for the park, scanning the snowy streets. The wind howled through bare trees, and freezing rain coated everything in a treacherous sheet of ice. He found her near the old gazebo, soaked to the skin, still clutching her precious handbag. "Mark," she called out, her voice nearly lost in the wind. "Mark, where are you? You said to meet you here." "Mrs. Carter." Darnell rushed to her, shrugging off his heavy police jacket to wrap around her shivering shoulders. "You're freezing. Let me take you home." She looked at him with wild, desperate eyes. "No. He's waiting for me. He sent me a letter. Said to meet him here at midnight. He's coming home. Don't you understand? He's finally coming home." She fumbled with her handbag, pulling out a crumpled envelope. Darnell recognized it as one of Mark's old letters from Afghanistan, the paper worn thin from countless readings. "Mrs. Carter, Evelyn," he said gently, taking her icy hands in his. "That letter is from 2005. Mark isn't coming?" "No," she whispered, her voice breaking. "No, you're wrong. He promised. He always keeps his promises." Her legs gave out, and Darnell caught her as she crumpled. "I know," he soothed, lifting her into his arms. She felt terrifyingly light, like a bird with hollow bones. "I know he does, but right now, we need to get you warm and safe. Will you let me help you? Please?" She buried her face in his shoulder, her tears hot against his neck despite the freezing rain. "I'm so lost, Mark. Everything's slipping away, and I can't hold on to anything anymore." "I've got you," he promised, carrying her carefully across the icy ground to his patrol car. "I've got you, and I'm not letting go." As he drove her home, Darnell knew he could no longer postpone the difficult decisions ahead. Her condition was deteriorating rapidly, and despite the community's support, she needed more care than they could provide. He thought of her resistance to assisted living, her fierce determination to stay in her home, waiting for a return that would never happen. But sometimes love means making the hard choices. Sometimes it means being strong enough to do what's necessary, even when it breaks your heart. Looking at Evelyn, huddled under his jacket in the passenger seat, still clutching her handbag of memories, Darnell made a silent promise, not just to her, but to Mark as well. He would find a way to help her that honored both her need for care and her need to hold on to her memories of Mark. He would be the son she needed now, even as she held on to the son she had lost. Because family isn't always about blood or birth. Sometimes it's about being there in the storm, about carrying someone else's memories when they can no longer hold them alone, about loving someone enough to help them let go. After the storm incident, Darnell knew he couldn't delay the inevitable any longer. The image of Evelyn standing in the freezing rain, calling out for Mark, haunted his dreams. With heavy heart but firm resolve, he contacted Sunrise Haven and began the difficult process of transitioning Evelyn into their memory care unit. Ms. Chun helped make the arrangements as gentle as possible. They chose a ground-floor room with a view of the garden, and Darnell spent days preparing it, hanging familiar photos on the walls and arranging her favorite armchair by the window. He brought her cherished Afghans from home, the ones she crocheted while waiting for Mark's letters, and made sure her bed had the lavender-scented sheets she loved. The hardest part was the actual move. Evelyn had been staying with him since the storm, and on moving day, she was having one of her more confused episodes. "Mark, honey, why are you packing my things?" she asked, following him around as he gathered the last of her essential belongings. "Are we going on a trip?" Darnell paused, carefully folding her favorite cardigan. "Yes, Mrs. Carter. A sort of trip. Remember how we talked about the nice place with the beautiful garden? But what about your room? You just painted it blue last summer." She clutched her handbag tighter. "And who will water my roses?" "Mrs. Rodriguez promised to take care of your roses," he assured her. "And I'll visit you every day. I promise." Her face clouded with confusion. "Visit? But you live with me. Ever since you came back from deployment." The words stuck in Darnell's throat. How do you explain to someone that their reality isn't real? That the comfort they find in their confusion might need to be stripped away for their own good? Instead, he took her hand and led her to his car, where Mrs. Rodriguez waited to accompany them. The drive to Sunrise Haven was quiet, broken only by Evelyn's soft humming of an old wartime song she used to sing to Mark. The staff welcomed them warmly, led by a kind-faced nurse named Sarah who seemed to understand instinctively how to put Evelyn at ease. "Mrs. Carter, would you like to help me arrange these lovely photos in your new room? I hear you have wonderful stories about each one." The distraction worked, and while Evelyn was engaged with Sarah, Darnell slipped out to complete the paperwork. His hand shook slightly as he signed the admission forms, feeling the weight of responsibility in each signature. True to his word, Darnell visited every day. He'd stop by in the mornings before his shift or in the evenings after work, sometimes still in his police uniform, which always made Evelyn smile. He brought fresh flowers for her room, bright daisies and soft pink roses that reminded her of her garden. On Sundays, he'd bring still warm pastries from her favorite bakery, and they'd share them while watching birds at the feeder outside her window. Some days were better than others. Sometimes she'd greet him as Officer Hayes, and they'd have almost normal conversations about the weather or the neighborhood gossip that Mrs. Rodriguez would share during her visits. Other days, she'd call him Mark and talk about his childhood, mixing memories of her son with current moments in a way that was both heartbreaking and beautiful. The staff grew fond of their daily visits, touched by the dedication of this police officer to the elderly woman who thought he was her son. Sarah, in particular, would update him on Evelyn's good days and bad, helping him navigate the increasingly frequent moments of confusion. "She asks for you when you're not here," Sarah told him one evening, always saying Mark will be home soon. "You've given her such comfort." On a quiet Sunday afternoon in early spring, Darnell arrived for his usual visit to find Evelyn sitting in her chair by the window, her handbag in her lap, looking more alert than she had in weeks. She turned to him as he entered, and he was struck by the clarity in her eyes. "Darnell," she said softly, using his real name. "I've been waiting for you." He sat beside her, taking her fragile hand in his. Her skin felt like tissue paper, but her grip was surprisingly firm. "You know," she continued, her voice steady, "I've been thinking a lot lately. About Mark, about you, about all the ways God works in mysterious ways." She paused, looking out at the garden, where early crocuses were pushing through the last patches of snow. "When Mark died, I thought God had abandoned me. I couldn't understand why he would take my only son." Darnell felt tears pricking at his eyes, but he remained silent, sensing she had more to say. "But now I understand." She turned back to him, her eyes bright with tears and revelation. "God gave me another son after I lost Mark. He gave me you." The words hit Darnell like a physical force, breaking down the last walls of professional distance he'd tried to maintain. Tears flowed freely down his face as he gripped her hand tighter. "Mrs. Carter, Evelyn," his voice cracked, "you've been more than just a duty or responsibility to me. You've helped me understand what it means to have a mother's love again. After losing my own mom so young. I know, dear heart." She reached up to wipe his tears with a trembling hand. "A mother always knows. And you've been such a good son, to both me and to Mark's memory." They sat together as the afternoon light faded, sharing memories, real ones this time, of their time together. Evelyn was more lucid than she had been in months, as if God had granted her this one clear moment to say everything she needed to say. When Darnell finally left that evening, she gave him an extra long hug. "Thank you," she whispered, "for letting me be your mother for a little while." The call came at 3 a.m. Evelyn had slipped away peacefully in her sleep, Sarah told him, clutching a photo of Mark to her chest. Darnell drove to Sunrise Haven through empty streets, his police uniform still on from his shift, his heart feeling too big for his chest. In her room, she looked peaceful, as if she were just sleeping. The morning light was just beginning to creep through the window, painting the room in soft grays and pinks. Darnell sat beside her bed and took out Mark's dog tags, which she had given him for safekeeping a few weeks earlier. "You can go home now," he whispered, placing the dog tags in her hands. "Mark's waiting for you. You don't have to worry anymore. You kept all your promises." The funeral was held at her church, where she had taught Sunday school for so many years. Darnell had arranged everything, working with Mrs. Rodriguez and other neighbors to ensure it would honor both Evelyn and the community she had loved so dearly. The turnout surprised even him. Former students from her Sunday school classes, now grown with children of their own, soldiers who had received her care packages during their deployments, neighbors whose lives she had touched over the decades. When it came time for the eulogy, Darnell stood at the podium in his dress uniform, Evelyn's worn handbag resting beside him. He looked out at the gathered faces, saw the love and grief reflected in each one, and began to speak. "Evelyn Carter was known to many of you as a neighbor, a teacher, a friend. To her son Mark, who gave his life serving our country, she was the mother who always kept the porch light on, who never stopped waiting for him to come home. And to me," his voice caught for a moment before steadying, "to me, she became the mother I never knew I needed." He spoke about their first meeting, about her confusion that brought her to his door night after night. But what seemed like a twist of fate, or a simple case of memory loss, became something profound. "Evelyn taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up who stays, who holds your memories when you can't hold them anymore. The handbag sat heavy against the podium as he continued. In this bag, Evelyn kept her most precious memories: Mark's dog tags, his letters, the bracelet he made her in second grade. But more than these physical mementos, she carried love. An endless, unconditional love that extended beyond her own loss to touch everyone around her. Looking down at his notes, Darnell saw they were spotted with tears. Some might say that Evelyn was confused in her final years, mixing up the present and the past, seeing her lost son in a stranger's face. But I think she saw more clearly than any of us. She saw that love doesn't end with loss. It transforms, it reaches out, it finds new ways to express itself. In her confusion, Evelyn taught me about clarity. In her loss, she taught me about finding. In her grief, she taught me about joy. She showed me that sometimes the greatest act of love is simply being present in someone else's story, holding space for their pain and their joy, their confusion and their clarity. He touched the worn leather of the handbag gently. I'll carry these memories now, just as I'll carry the memory of her love. And I promise to live in a way that honors both her and Mark, with compassion, with courage, and with an understanding that family is less about who we're born to and more about who we choose to love. After the service, as people shared stories and memories over coffee and Evelyn's famous snickerdoodle cookies, baked by Mrs. Rodriguez from a recipe, Darnell sat quietly in a pew, the handbag in his lap. Inside were the physical remnants of a life well lived. Mark's dog tags, now returned to their place among his letters, the faded friendship bracelet, photographs and newspaper clippings yellowed with age. But the true legacy wasn't in these items. It was in the love that had brought them together, in the way Evelyn had turned confusion into connection, loss into love. It was in the lesson she had taught him about what it means to be family, about the courage it takes to love someone through their darkness, about the gift of being present in someone else's story. Sarah, the nurse who had helped care for Evelyn, approached him quietly. "She was different when you were here," she said softly. "More peaceful, more present. Even when she was confused about who you were, she was never confused about how much she loved you." Darnell nodded, unable to speak around the lump in his throat. He thought about all the nights he'd walked Evelyn home, all the stories she'd shared, all the moments of confusion that had somehow led to the clearest understanding of love he'd ever known. The handbag would sit on his shelf at home, a reminder not of what was lost, but of what was found: an unexpected family, an unconditional love, and the understanding that sometimes the greatest gift we can give another person is simply being there, holding their memories when they can no longer hold them themselves. In the end, that's what family really means. Not just sharing blood or names or memories, but sharing love in all its messy, beautiful, confusing glory. Evelyn had taught him that, and it was a lesson he would carry forever, as precious as any memory in her worn leather bag. 6 months after Evelyn's passing, Darnell sat in his patrol car, parked outside what had been her house. New owners had painted the trim a different color and replaced her beloved rose bushes with modern landscaping. But he could still see traces of her influence: the bird feeder she'd hung, the wooden bench where she'd waited countless evenings for Mark to come home. His shift had ended hours ago, but he found himself drawn here more often lately, reflecting on how much his life had changed since that first knock on his door. Before Evelyn, he'd been a good cop, sure, dedicated, professional, by the book. But something had been missing, a deeper understanding of what it meant to truly serve his community. "You okay, Hayes?" Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio, pulling him from his thoughts. "Yeah," he replied, smiling slightly. "Just thinking about Mrs. Carter. You know, before her, I thought being a good cop was about enforcing laws, maintaining order. But she taught me it's really about protecting people's stories, their connections, their dignity." He could hear the smile in Rodriguez's voice when he responded, "She changed you, man. Changed all of us." Later that afternoon, Darnell visited Riverside Cemetery, carrying a bouquet of roses from Mrs. Rodriguez's garden, cuttings from Evelyn's original bushes that she'd saved. He stopped first at Mark's grave, clearing away some fallen leaves before laying half the flowers at the base of the military headstone. "Hey, Mark," he said softly, running his fingers over the engraved letters. "Thank you. Thank you for sharing your mother with me, for giving me a chance to be the son she needed when you couldn't be there. I hope you know how much she loved you. Right until the end, he sat on the grass, not caring about his uniform pants. You know, she told me once about how you wanted to be a cop after your service. I think maybe that's why she found her way to my door that night. Maybe some part of her knew. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and distant rain. I wish I could have known you, brother. But in a way, I feel like I did. Through her stories, through her love. He touched the headstone gently. I promise you, I'll keep being the kind of officer you would have been. One who serves with heart, not just with badge and gun. Rising, he walked the short distance to Evelyn's grave. Her headstone was newer, the granite still sharp-edged and bright. Beneath her name and dates was the inscription he'd chosen. A mother's love knows no boundaries. As he arranged the remaining roses, Darnell thought about his latest project. Inspired by his experience with Evelyn, he'd started volunteering at Sunrise Haven and other local care homes, spending time with residents who had few visitors. He'd also begun speaking at community centers and police training sessions, sharing Evelyn's story to help others understand the human side of dealing with elderly residents, particularly those with memory issues. Just last week, he'd given a presentation to new recruits at the academy. Sometimes the person you think you're protecting ends up protecting something in you, he told them. Sometimes the life you save might be your own. The program had grown beyond his expectations. Other officers had started volunteering, and local businesses had begun contributing. The pharmacy delivering medications to homebound seniors, the grocery store organizing delivery services, even the high school starting a program where students would visit care homes to record residents' life stories. Sarah, the nurse from Sunrise Haven, had called him recently about a new resident who reminded her of Evelyn. She keeps asking for her daughter, who passed away years ago, Sarah had said. Would you come talk to her? Share your experience? He'd gone, of course, and found himself sitting with an elderly woman named Grace, listening to her stories about her daughter, helping her hold on her memories while gently anchoring her in the present. It wasn't the same as his relationship with Evelyn. Nothing ever would be, but it was a way of honoring her legacy. Back home that evening, Darnell carefully lifted Evelyn's handbag from its place of honor on his bookshelf. He'd kept it exactly as she'd left it, all of Mark's letters and mementos still inside. Sometimes, on difficult days, he would take out the old friendship bracelet or read one of Mark's letters, finding comfort in these tangible connections to both mother and son. The leather was soft with age and use, shaped by years of Evelyn's grip. It carried not just memories but a kind of wisdom, about love that transcends boundaries, about the strength it takes to keep hoping, about the courage required to let someone into your heart even when you know loss is inevitable. He'd been carrying something else in the bag lately, a journal where he recorded his own memories of Evelyn, stories she'd told him, lessons she'd taught him. Someday, he thought, he might share these stories with others who needed to understand that family isn't always about blood, that love finds its own ways to heal and connect. That night, unable to sleep, Darnell sat at his kitchen table writing in the journal. Evelyn taught me that being a protector isn't just about keeping people safe. It's about keeping their stories safe, their dignity, their connections to the world. Sometimes protection means simply being present, being willing to exist in someone else's reality for a while, holding space for their confusion and their clarity alike. She showed me that every person, no matter how confused or elderly or alone they might seem, carries within them a universe of stories, of loves, of moments that shaped them. Our job, as police officers, as community members, as human beings, is to help protect those stories, to honor them, to ensure they're not lost in the rush of our busy world. I carry her handbag now, not just as a collection of memories, but as a reminder of this promise, to see the person behind every call for help, to understand that sometimes the greatest service we can offer is simply our presence, our willingness to listen, our capacity to care. The next morning, Darnell received an unexpected call from Captain Sullivan. "Hayes, that program you started? The brass has noticed. They want to implement it department-wide, maybe even share it with other cities. Would you be willing to help develop the training curriculum?" "Yes," he answered without hesitation. "But I'd like to name it after Evelyn Carter. She's the one who taught me everything I know about true community policing." "The Evelyn Carter Initiative," Sullivan mused, "has a nice ring to it. The program would focus on teaching officers to look beyond the immediate issues they encountered on calls involving elderly residents, to see the stories behind the confusion, the humanity behind the complaints, the dignity every person deserves regardless of their mental state. Later that week, Darnell attended a community meeting where they were discussing expanding services for elderly residents. Mrs. Rodriguez was there, along with other neighbors who had known Evelyn. They shared stories about her kindness, her cookies, her unwavering love for her son. You know, Mrs. Rodriguez said afterward, Evelyn would be so proud of what's happening here. She always said one person's love could change a whole community. She was right, Darnell replied, thinking of all the ways her love had rippled outward, touching lives she'd never even known. She's still changing things, still bringing people together. That Sunday, as he had every week since her passing, Darnell visited both graves again. He brought fresh flowers, roses for Evelyn, lilies for Mark, and spent time at each headstone, sharing updates about his week, about the program's progress, about the lives being touched by their story. At Mark's grave, he placed a small American flag alongside the flowers. The recruits ask about you sometimes when I tell them about your mom. You're still serving, brother, still protecting people through her story, through what she taught me. At Evelyn's grave, he sat longer, taking out his journal to read her his latest entries. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded him of her garden. I understand now, he said softly, why you kept showing up at my door. It wasn't just confusion or coincidence. You had more love to give, more lessons to teach, more lives to touch. Even in your confusion, you were exactly where you needed to be. He touched the smooth granite of her headstone, feeling the warmth of the sun-heated stone under his fingers. I'll keep telling your story, Mom. I'll keep helping people understand that love doesn't end with goodbye, that family is something we create every day through our choices and our actions. Standing, he brushed the grass from his knees and touched the headstone one last time. I'll always be your son, he whispered, and I'll make sure your love continues to protect and serve this community, just like you protected and served me. As he walked back to his car, Darnell passed an elderly man visiting a nearby grave. Without hesitation, he stopped to help the man steady himself on the uneven ground, offered him a bottle of water from his car, and listened for a few minutes as the man shared stories about his late wife. It was a small gesture, the kind Evelyn would have made without thinking twice. But these small gestures, these moments of connection and compassion, were her true legacy. A legacy Darnell would carry forward in his own way, one interaction at a time, one story at a time, one heart at a time. The handbag sat in the passenger seat beside him, a tangible reminder of the promise he'd made and would keep making every day, to live with the same open heart that had allowed Evelyn to turn a moment of confusion into a bond stronger than blood, to transform loss into love, to find family in the most unexpected places. And somewhere, he liked to think, Evelyn and Mark were together again, watching over him, proud of the son he had become, the officer he was, and the man he continued to be, carrying their story forward, protecting and serving not just with his badge, but with his heart. The end of daylight painted long shadows across the cemetery as Darnell drove away. But the porch lights were coming on all along Maple Street, each one a beacon of welcome, a reminder that sometimes love finds its way home through the darkness, guided by nothing more than an open heart and a willingness to answer when it knocks at your door. What would you do if life unexpectedly gave you a second chance to love and be loved, even in the unlikeliest of ways? Could you embrace the gift, or would you let it slip away? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining us on this heartwarming and heartbreaking journey of Evelyn and Darnell. Their story reminds us that love knows no boundaries, that even in the depths of confusion and pain, a connection can spark healing and hope. If this story moved you, consider subscribing for more heartfelt narratives that celebrate resilience, humanity, and the unyielding power of kindness. Your support means the world to me as I strive to create stories that inspire and touch the soul. Thank you for watching, and may we all find ways to bring a little light into someone else's life. See you in the next story.